watching America's most trusted TV news network.
We've got a severe weather threat.
Winds have been gusting the full force of this thing.
The Weather Channel. Get your daily dose of everything weather.
Wow! Boy, do we have a lot to talk about.
Weather Today from the Weather Channel. New episodes every day, only on Quibi.
Hello, America. Welcome back to continued coverage on Hurricane Delta. I'm meteorologist Reynolds Wolf coming to you from New Orleans, also known as the Big Easy, where life is anything but easy when it comes to the shoving match between water and land that you have here in this part of the world. It really is a precarious position. When you think about the city, much of it is below sea level. To the south, you've got the Mississippi River, but to the north, you also have Lake Pontchartrain. The city is located pretty much in a vice. And from the time of its founding back in 1718 to present day, you had a series of levees, dams, canals, and pumps. Some of those pumps sound as though they would be something of a modern age, but believe it or not, they actually had 4 steam-powered pumps back in 1859 to help push water that could be rising in the city. So it has been a struggle that seems as though it's going on forever. When you think about this year and what a busy season it's been, here we go again, getting ready for what the tropics may bring to this land and these shores in Louisiana. Let's give you, again, some video that showed just happened in the recent past when it comes to flooding. This is some of the surge we had from Sally. We had issues all across much of Louisiana, but the rising water, certainly a tremendous concern, always is here, even with garden variety storms. But when you have something of a tropical nature, when you have, of course, a depression or a tropical storm or even a hurricane, obviously that raised the hair on the back of the neck and brings back the concern. We spoke earlier with Colin Arnold from the New Orleans EMA, and here's what he had to say.
This has come around over and over again, and we've been ready every time. And I'm really proud of our residents because when we ask them to do this, they listen. And I don't expect anything different this time as well. And we're looking at something that is, very unpredictable and quite uncertain right now, but certainly something that is we have to watch all the way in.
Situation you can find in New Orleans and certainly in much of the Louisiana coast is one that's very interesting. It's something that transcends not just families, but we're talking generations and generations of families that have lived here. And part of the DNA, part of the makeup is being in a state of preparedness. It is always with great respect that they live their lives with what can come out of the Gulf of Mexico, and this time is really no exception. They always know that if something passes one time, guess what? There's always an opportunity that you might have something else come in from the tropics. So it's interesting, Alex, as we look back off in the distance, you'll notice a little bit of the Superdome. Always a reminder of what can happen. I mean, sure, it's home of the Saints, you've got bowl games there, but also a lot of memories back with Katrina. And it's just an exhibit A, Alex, of things that have happened in the past, learning those lessons, applying them to the present, and obviously to the future. Back to you, Alex.
All right, thanks so much, Reynolds. And so no doubt hoping we don't have to deal with anything like what we had to deal with when it came to Katrina. But here's the forecast. When it comes to Delta, here as we head on towards the end of the week, there's the projected path moving across that southern portion of the Gulf of Mexico. Eventually, we'll see more of a turn towards the north as we start to move through Thursday into Friday morning. Still looking at 130-mile-per-hour hurricane. Now, we've been talking about that potential for this thing to come down a bit in terms of its strength as it approaches the landmass here for you in southern parts of Louisiana. Some cooler waters here for us, and also some stronger winds that may help to kind of shred this thing apart just a tad. We can only hope for that to happen, but still expect a strong system coming on through. It will dump some rain, and that could lead to some flash flooding in a number of areas from the western portions of the Florida Panhandle all the way towards eastern portions of Texas. And then continuing as we roll down the road Friday into Saturday as some of the heavy rain begins to move northbound, the possibility for flash flooding certainly does exist. And we have to watch out for isolated tornadoes. These tropical systems coming to shore, that can happen. Rainfall amounts, this is the forecast to come through Saturday. Looks like right now the higher totals will be here across eastern Texas, Louisiana, up into portions of Arkansas and western Mississippi. 3 to 5 inches in the yellow. The orange area is 5 to 8 inches. And of course, this could shift east and west depending on, of course, the exact track of the system. And don't forget about the waves. Even those areas here in south parts of Texas may have to deal with some wave action showing up there, despite the fact that the core of the system should move to your east. So a number of impacts along the Gulf Coast.
110-mile-per-hour wind gusts slamming Cancun this morning. Hurricane Delta making landfall along the northeastern coast of the Yucatan Peninsula around 5:30 this morning Eastern Time. These strong winds are just a preview of what we could see along the Gulf Coast at some point Friday. So that's not a lot of time between now and then when we know Delta will be making a landfall along the northern Gulf Coast. It is a certainty, as close to a certainty as you can get. So be prepared, especially along the Louisiana coast and, of course, areas nearby, eastern Texas and, of course, Mississippi and Alabama. You will see some impacts, even if the center, let's say, moves onshore 100 or 200 miles away. There'll be a strong onshore wind and a lot of coastal flooding as well. This is what we think Delta looks like right now, a couple of hours ago anyway, where we sort of combined all the aircraft data and all kinds of information going into it, suggesting that perhaps the winds maybe aren't even 100 miles per hour, especially with the center likely over land right now. Hurricane hunters are in there sampling around the region over water. We're finding pressures, of course, with these big thunderstorms out here, nowhere near as low as it is in the center, and the wind's still well over 50 miles per hour at a great distance away from the center. This is what it might look like. Let me get back to that graphic. I'm sorry about that. This is what it might look like near landfall, and I want you to be prepared for it. Let's say Friday afternoon and evening, there might be a landfall with a very strong onshore wind throughout Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama, bringing coastal flooding with it along the way. We'll be right back.
Before discovering Nexium 24-hour to treat
Welcome back to Weather Center Live. We are tracking Hurricane Delta, and it is going to make landfall along the northern Gulf Coast. And very possibly, Louisiana will see the worst impacts from this landfall, and that would happen on Friday. So if you have interests, even all the way from East Texas through coastal Louisiana and interior sections as well, I might add. I'll get to that in a second. But also coastal Mississippi and Alabama, even though maybe you're not in the cone right now, still the impacts will be significant even if the center passes more than 100 miles away from you. So that is something to consider. And also note that we may be dealing with a very powerful hurricane at landfall and carrying its impacts well inland. Very strong winds. If it is indeed expected to move reasonably quickly inland, do expect those strong damaging winds to go hundreds of miles inland as well. Here's an estimate of the forecast here from the GFS model, which appears to be behaving consistently and is sort of on track with the official forecast from the Hurricane Center. So what we've got here is Delta, potentially even as strong as a Category 4 during the day, late afternoon, or overnight tomorrow night, Thursday night. We may begin to see some of the peripheral impacts by then across parts of the northern Gulf Coast, from Texas through Alabama. Some showers and some gusty winds from time to time. Then let's say landfall occurs during the late morning or early afternoon on Friday, potentially, moving somewhere in this area of Louisiana. Very destructive winds will be carried onshore with it, perhaps gusts over 100 miles per hour in some of the places that we've seen very recently. Remember with Hurricane Laura, unfortunately, we have to consider that possibility. But also there will be very significant impacts well to the east of the center in terms of an onshore wind and coastal flooding, perhaps in areas as far east as Mobile, Alabama, or even farther east than that. And then we have to watch ourselves with the possibility of carrying those destructive winds well inland as well, perhaps Jackson, Mississippi, especially along and to the right of where that track goes. Now, again, we don't know exactly where the center is going to go, but once you get inland, the damaging winds get contracted to very near the center, and especially along the right side of it. And that is something we have to watch, where we could see those damaging winds that could bring down trees well inland, Alex, long after landfall. Back to you.
All right, thanks, Dr. Postel. Well, wildfires, they can make their own weather. And over the past few months, we've seen them create weather events known as firenados or fire whirls. Jim Cantori shows us how climate change is making these rare occurrences happen more frequently.
Being up close to a raging wildfire like this one is a terrifying experience. Unfortunately, scenes like this are going to be more common as climate change increases wildfire activity. Average annual temperatures across the western U.S. have risen nearly 2 degrees in the past few decades, allowing large wildfires to thrive on these dry, extreme conditions. You can just feel the heat. Temperatures over 1,500 degrees, flames shooting high into the air. Guess what? We can get fire whirls that develop in an instant. Pockets of extreme temperature causing the air to accelerate upward, right? Air rushing in toward the ground to fill the void. Rotation tightens and produces a column of swirling fire and smoke. These fire whirls, as they're called, are often short-lived and usually less than 50 feet across. But under certain conditions, large fires, like this one, can generate pyrocumulus thunderstorms that can produce large, long-lasting firenados. They can be hundreds of feet across and thousands of feet tall. Look at the size of that thing. Could you imagine the power? They combine the intensity of the raging fire with the destructive power of a tornado. Winds over 140 miles an hour leave a trail of destruction and create extremely hazardous conditions for firefighters. Unfortunately, this terrifying display might be showing up more often as warming temperatures and drying conditions become more prevalent across the western United States.
Wow, and unfortunately, we do have the risk for fires, at least fire danger here in the northern parts of the Rockies through this evening. Red flag warnings and fire weather watches that are in place here for us. Great Falls, you're in the middle of that, all the way down towards Casper there in Wyoming. Meanwhile, we still have all these fires that are burning here. Greater than 100 acres, the large fires, 68 across the country. Vast majority of those are here in the west. But here's a look at the threat for rain coming in. This is really a good sight to see with the next system coming in for the weekend. That provides us with some rain, some decent rains in the Pacific Northwest, but even into Northern California, there'll be a bit of rain, and then that will head into the interior where we could even see some snow, particularly in the higher terrain, some snow showing up there. But again, we have some fires in those zones, so that would be helpful as well. Here's the forecast over the next several days. Coming in, you see the fire icons and some of the precipitation that we are anticipating. Now, we're not looking for a ton of rain here in Northern California, but we haven't had anything. So we will take this up to an inch here in the northern part of the state. Be nice to see a little bit more farther south. Doesn't look like that's going to happen. Higher totals in, again, the Pacific Northwest. Well, let's bring you up to date on what's going on here with new hurricane watches that are now up here for us. We'll be getting the update on what's going on across the Gulf Coast, along with the very latest track on Delta.
Well, this is real.
When your cameras roll, our experts react.
Jaw-dropping.
Weather Gone Viral, Sunday nights at 9, here on the Weather Channel.
And breaking now, we have got hurricane watches on the northern edge of the Gulf Coast, but all concerns are beyond the water's edge. Farther to the south, we have a northbound system, that being Delta. Full story on how they're preparing here in New Orleans, coming up in a few moments.
And with just 2 days to go until a likely landfall, there are still plenty of factors at play that could drastically change Delta's forecast. I'm breaking it all down coming up.
Plus, the historic wildfire season continues to rage out west, but rain relief may be on the way for some of the hardest hit cities. We're timing out when the first drops will fall. Well, hi there and welcome to Weather Center Live. I'm meteorologist Alex Wallace, along with hurricane specialist Dr. Greg Postel. The U.S. Gulf Coast, well, on alert as a dangerous Hurricane Delta spins its way into the Gulf of Mexico. That's anticipated here as we head on through today. This, of course, after making landfall in the Yucatan Peninsula earlier this morning. Let's get you the very latest on what is going on with the system. And again, it is a hurricane still at this point. New update from the National Hurricane Center still has it as a 105-mile-per-hour Category 2 hurricane moving to the northwest at 17 miles per hour. Still bringing some heavy downpours, the gusty wind shear force right across that northeastern portion of the Yucatan Peninsula at this hour. Eventually, we'll see it emerge over the Gulf of Mexico. And at that point, may begin to re-strengthen. For the time being, you still see some pretty healthy storms, intense storms here right around that center of the circulation. Here's a closer view on that. Those deeper shades of the purple indicating some of those taller cloud tops that are reaching way up into the atmosphere. And that's where you have some of the most intense activity associated with Delta. Here we have with our alerts, and we'll see if these are updated. I'm not sure if this is updated just yet. Again, the advisory just came in, but we still have hurricane warnings still in place here for you across that northeastern portion of the Yucatan, and then tropical storm warnings here for you, western portions of Cuba at this point. Still watching for storm surge potential, particularly on that north coast, 6 to 9 foot storm surge. That is still a possibility there. Now, as this thing emerges out of the Gulf, we should start to see again improving conditions in the form of rain activity coming down, as well as some of those stronger winds. By the time we get into late tonight, you can see what we're looking at here. This is essentially the wind field estimated here, showing you the red areas. That's the core of the hurricane force winds, which has been about 30 miles from the center. Tropical storm force winds have been about 140 miles away from the center. So by the time we get into late tonight, all those stronger winds certainly pulling well away from the Yucatan, and much improved conditions are anticipated. Still some rain to come, though. It could be an area of 3 to 5 here, that yellow zone here for you, with some 2 to 3 patches as well. But again, we will start to see, as we work our way on through tonight and certainly by tomorrow, much better conditions showing up here for us across the Yucatan Peninsula. All right, let's go ahead and bring in Dr. Postel, focusing on what's going on with this system here. And again, the new advisory coming on in, Dr. Postel. Doesn't look like any major changes, with the exception of some of those watches that have now been issued for parts of the U.S. Gulf Coast.
I love how you lead me into that, Alex. That's perfect, because we just have now the hurricane watches that are posted and shown here, which the hurricane watch does include parts of eastern Texas. And that is something to consider, with the possibility of hurricane conditions in the next 48 hours. And that does extend all the way through parts of central and eastern Louisiana, with tropical storm force or tropical storm watches out in those areas in yellow, which does include Galveston, for example, and on the east side, New Orleans, Bay St. Louis, and areas to the east of there. So this is the expectation that Delta, as a hurricane, will be making landfall on Friday, very likely on the first half of Friday, and bring with it some very bad weather along the way and very significant coastal flooding. This is the cone from the Hurricane Center that was just issued, newly updated. You can see the thinking is essentially the same. It begins to turn northward during the evening tomorrow and then accelerate northeastward from there across, with the center likely crossing Louisiana, we think, the coastline early in the day or middle of the day on Friday as a very powerful hurricane still. Let's zoom on this, because there's a couple of things here. It may have winds over 100 miles per hour with it as it makes landfall, and carry some very strong winds right near the center of it, well inland. So we're going to be dealing with that wind damage threat across parts of Louisiana and interior Mississippi, a long way from landfall as well. Why are we going to see sort of that northward turn later on tomorrow? Well, there's really no other way around it. When you have a trough in the jet stream like that, and it's October, these troughs get pretty far south this time of year, we are going to see this likely respond to that change in the steering pattern, and that is indeed why pretty much the guidance is clustered on this very idea of a north and then northeastward acceleration. With the track guidance, all the different models here shown in yellow, kind of showing that in the Hurricane Center's official forecast like that. So what we're dealing with is a very likely landfall. The center, remember, the landfall is the center in Louisiana on Friday, with the impacts extending well out from that, especially on the east side. Here's what the GFS model thinks, which is a reasonable, I think, forecast to give you an idea of what conditions might be like during the day on Friday. Let's say we have wind gusts over 100 miles per hour near the very core of this thing, especially on the eastern eye wall, with very significant storm surge with an onshore wind extending all the way to western Florida. That is something to consider. And also, we will likely see those damaging winds extend well inland. But this is one of the things that we're hoping for. If you look at the heat content, the amount of fuel in the ocean, not the atmosphere and ocean, but just the ocean, that's able to provide for this thing as it moves northward, it is going to likely move over a little area where there's some enhanced fuel here. So we could see that intensification during the late day tomorrow. But then, as it closes in on the coast, the water's temperatures drop dramatically, and there's a lot less fuel there. So it is not likely, we don't think, to be a major hurricane, in part because of that, and also the very strong wind shear. Doesn't mean it's impossible, but the signs are there that this will be weakening on final approach. Alex, back to you.
All right, thanks so much, Dr. Postel. Well, you know what? The state of Louisiana is in the cone of concern when it comes to Hurricane Delta. Got a look here live here at New Orleans right now, and conditions in the Big Easy likely to start to deteriorate as we head towards that Friday time frame. Now, we could be looking at a shift in the track, and that could push more of the worst of the weather into New Orleans. That is a possibility. Can't rule it out. Regardless, Louisiana Governor John Bel Edwards says people need to be prepared.
Is it going to be a 3? Is it going to be a 2? I would ask people not to focus so much on that and just to prepare for a major hurricane. And all of the damaging winds, the damaging surge, and the damaging rain, whether it's from flash flooding or river flooding that hurricanes can bring.
Well, our Reynolds Wolf is live in New Orleans this morning, a city no stranger to preparing for hurricanes. Reynolds, you've been to Louisiana to cover numerous storms. People there, no doubt, got to be taking this thing seriously, as they should be.
Absolutely, but I have to admit to you, the people that I have spoken with, there is a sense of resignation about it all. It's real. Are we doing this again? The answer obviously is yes. I mean, we still have a ways to go in the season. It is time to prepare in Louisiana, and I'll tell you, the people that we've met, they're certainly ready. They truly are. They've had so many close calls this year. You never know if the next one is going to be the one. Plus, when you think about a city like New Orleans, all that it's dealt with in the past, you think about Katrina, my goodness, Isaac, caused quite a bit of damage along parts of Canal Street not too long ago, about 8 years ago or so. But you can even go back into the 1960s with Hurricane Betsy. So certainly some trying times, but they are vigilant here. But the story can also be shared with people that live up and down the Louisiana coast. In fact, Grand Isle, what a situation they've had there. You take a look at the beaches, which really show the scars of other recent storms that have come on through. The erosion, the coastal erosion, the way to try to stem that, you can see what they've been doing, creating a bit of a blue patchwork at times to try to retain a bit of the foundation of those dunes. We did speak to some Grand Isle business owners, and as you might imagine, the frustration, it's there and it is real.
I'd say this is about the 5th time we've taken the boats out, or at least getting all the rods and all the gear out.
This is our 4th and 5th storm in a row that people have had to come and pick up their belongings, and we've had to leave and evacuate the island.
With all these storms, we're losing a lot of our beach. Our customers come down here wanting to use our beach access, and our beach access is closed.
But it's one of those situations where you have to prepare, you have to make those maneuvers, because what's the alternative, right? Well, you look at the system, there's Delta, continues to spin, and it is expected to eventually break free from the vicinity of the Yucatan, eventually moving over to the expanse of the Gulf of Mexico, where, as Dr. Postel mentioned, there could be some fluctuations, there could be some strengthening, and a very dangerous hurricane could be coming on the shores as we make our way into Thursday, Friday, and of course Saturday moves well inland, causing more problems. And Alex, I know you're going to pick up with that, the potential of other problems. You know, it's interesting listening to Governor John Bel Edwards, and when it comes to if it's by surge, if it's by heavy rainfall, rising water is the biggest threat. Back to you.
It really is all about the water, no doubt about it. That's one of the big concerns here for us. But yes, there will be some winds as well. And we take a look at the forecast, and you do see as it approaches here, this is Friday morning, still 120 mile per hour hurricane getting closer and closer now. We are anticipating that it will further weaken, but still a strong system, and then continuing down the road through the weekend, bringing in, again, those impacts in the form of some gusty winds and some of those heavy downpours. The downpours could lead to some flash flooding from essentially western portions of Florida, the Panhandle, all the way to eastern portions of Texas, and even starting to get into southern parts of Mississippi. All those areas here have at least the possibility for flash flooding, and that extends north as we move through the day on Friday into Saturday. Again, as the system moves in that general direction, heightened risk, a little bit more of a heightened risk in that darker shade of the red for some of that flash flooding to take place. Now, the good thing is that we are expecting this thing to continue to move as opposed to stalling out and just crawling up here the Mississippi River Valley. But still, even despite that, there's still a lot of tropical moisture and that opportunity for some flash flooding to take place. There's also the risk, as we see this thing get closer, for isolated tornadoes to fire up. We oftentimes see that with tropical systems as they move closer to land and move on to land. We do see that risk, particularly on the east side. We'll be watching for that risk for the isolated tornadoes to spin up. So that's something that we'll have to watch for. And as I mentioned, a lot of tropical moisture with this system that'll be pushing northbound as we head on through our Thursday, and certainly as we get into Friday, and then continuing to move its way inland. Potentially could see this thing, at least the core of it, what's left by Saturday evening there across central parts of Tennessee, and then continuing up the road north and eastbound. Parts of the Ohio Valley, Mid-Atlantic, Northeast could feel some of the impacts. All right. As far as the rain is concerned, the biggest totals, yeah, you see the bullseye right now. Far east Texas up into western sections of Mississippi, parts of Arkansas, you're in that 3 to 5 inch range with some pockets of 5 to 8 inches. And remember, again, there could be a shift in this depending on the exact track, but just getting the picture right now where we are anticipating some of the higher totals. And storm surge issues as well. We've got watches up from parts of Texas all the way into parts of southern Alabama. So a lot of issues that will be felt for some of these areas here, including, again, that rise in the water. Dr. Postel?
Mobile, Alabama, currently on the eastern edge of the area, likely to experience tropical storm force wind gusts when Delta approaches the Louisiana coast. The city's still recovering from the impact of Hurricane Sally, which came ashore 3 weeks ago between Mobile and Pensacola. Let's have a look at some of the impacts we expect from Hurricane Delta. Let's first assess what it is now and what it looks like and how strong it is. And obviously, with the center likely still over land, it is not as strong nearly as it was this time yesterday. And it is estimated that perhaps by some estimates, maybe the wind speeds are closer to 80 than 105 miles per hour, especially now that the center is likely over here. Now, this sampling came from a couple of hours ago from a variety of sources, including the hurricane hunters of recent days and also a lot of other data that goes into that. But that's the idea. And notice that the winds do extend outward. Strong winds, well over 50 miles per hour, do extend outward over 100 miles. So that is something to consider when we think about landfall during the day on Friday, that we will see very strong winds pretty far from the center as well, because it will likely get bigger as it approaches the northern Gulf Coast. This is the most recent pass from the hurricane hunters, thankfully doing their great job as they always do, and now on their way home. But this is what they found on the northern edge here, pressures in the 990s and winds over 50. But they weren't near the worst conditions, of course, with this hurricane. So that is just what they're doing. They can't fly over land, so they gave us an idea of what some of the outer edges looked like weather-wise. But look at this. Let's say Friday afternoon, we're dealing with the landfall late in the day with the center, let's just say, crossing Louisiana coast, which is very reasonable. Very strong winds will be onshore, perhaps wind gusts over 100 miles per hour along the coast, bringing extremely strong storm surge and onshore winds all the way through Mississippi, Alabama, and even in western Florida as well, and carrying, Alex, those damaging winds along and to the right of where the center goes, hundreds of miles inland. Back to you.
All right, well, you know, as Hurricane Delta approaches the U.S., the time to prepare is now. Our Jim Cantori shares some tips and tricks for keeping your valuables safe and dry.
During a tropical storm or hurricane, it's not easy to keep you or your belongings warm and dry. So here are a few household items that can help you out in a pinch. There are dozens of things you can do with large plastic trash bags during a storm. You can fill them with water and use them as sandbags, as a rain collector, a tarp, or a waterproof poncho. Small plastic bags are handy as well. Try wearing them as socks inside your shoes. Not only will your feet stay dry, but they will keep your feet warm, even if your shoes get wet, which they likely will. If you're looking for a safe place to store your valuables when there's a risk of water inside the house, try the dishwasher. Yeah, for extra peace of mind, you can wrap the items in plastic bags, but that closed door creates a seal, and that will keep the water out. Depending on where you are, you may need to start a fire for warmth. So pre-making these fire starters with just an egg carton, lint, and a little petroleum jelly can be a lifesaver. You can store them in a sealed bag until you need them. Just a few ways you can use those household items to help you prepare for a tropical storm or hurricane.
Some good tips. Well, here we are looking at the forecast for now in terms of where the heaviest rain is expected to fall. And you have the zone across Louisiana getting up into parts of Arkansas, Mississippi, 3, 4, 5, 6 inches of rain will be possible. Lake Charles, I know you don't want to hear this, but we do have a threat for some heavy rain coming on through. Thursday night into Friday, we've got that rain coming on in. And, of course, the winds will start to pick up. We should see things improving Saturday afternoon as this thing moves farther and farther away. For now, New Orleans, an inch or so, that's what we are anticipating there in the city. But again, a shift in the track, and that could change.
When I started this commute,
hurricane season doesn't stop for a pandemic, and neither do we.
From this point forward, conditions will continue to deteriorate.
Don't let COVID-19 take your eye off the tropics. This year's threat is more complex and dangerous than ever before.
Remain vigilant, pay close attention to the Weather Channel.
No one can cover this historic hurricane season better than the Weather Channel. Get the information you need to stay safe every day. Storm safety in a pandemic, all season long, right here on the Weather Channel.
That's Hurricane Delta making landfall around 5:30 Eastern time this morning. 5:30 Central time. And this is along the northeastern coast of the Yucatan Peninsula. It roared onshore with a Category 2 wind speed, gusts over 110 miles per hour. You can see the strong winds whipping through the trees here in Playa del Carmen. The storm also produced a lot of lightning. You can see that. Now, one of the reasons why there was a lot of lightning is because there were extremely cold cloud tops associated with Delta as it moved through the region. And some of the cloud tops may have been as high as 70,000 feet. If you look at some of the temperatures there, minus 97 Celsius. So extremely strong convection, some ice in there, and we got some of that lightning. As far as the winds go, fortunately right now, or in the last few hours, you can sort of assimilate all the data that's come in and give a reasonable estimate that the winds are probably somewhere between 80 and 100 miles per hour now that the center is over land, likely over here somewhere. But notice that some still very strong winds extend way out from where the center of circulation is here. So that is something to consider. And again, we always tell you not to focus on exactly necessarily where the center is. It's, of course, important to know where the center is going. Don't turn your attention away from that. But also include the idea that there's also bad weather a long distance away from the center. So this is what it looks like on the satellite pictures. This is what I'm talking about. Some of these cloud tops are still extremely cold. And earlier, as I mentioned, maybe as tall as 70,000 feet, which is not that common. The atmospheric and oceanic environment allowed it to produce some incredibly deep convection over the region. And because it still has some of that in there, we have to watch out for this thing getting pretty strong once it gets back out over water. And that is officially reflected in the Hurricane Center's forecast. You can see that they have it intensifying once again up to 120 miles per hour later on tomorrow, and then holding that through the early part of Friday as it closes in on the northern Gulf Coast, and then probably on a weakening trend along final approach for a whole host of reasons. One, there's the atmospheric component. The wind shear will be increasing. And also the water is a lot cooler, and there's not a lot of heat content here in the northern shelf waters. So we can hope that those two factors will be in play and weaken Delta on its arrival. But it will still bring very significant weather, we know that, and also likely carry some damaging winds well inland. Let's say the center moves along here, right along into the east of where that center goes. Do expect winds that can do damage to trees and some infrastructure as well inland, over 100 miles. So be prepared for the possibility of that. And we'll have more information, of course, Alex, as we get closer to the time. But the idea is that the impacts will spread not just from one side where the center is, but also well inland. Back to you.
All right, thanks so much, Dr. Postal. We turn to the northeast now, where we could see some feisty storms try to fire up here from the interior parts of the region all the way to the 95 corridor. And that includes places like Syracuse, where we've got wet weather now, and Boston, where that is on the way. Looks good now, but that'll change. Watch for damaging winds. One of the main threats here with today's severe weather potential. Looking at the radar, it is a wet time here across upstate sections of New York, the interior areas of the Northeast. Some steady rain here are getting ready to approach you there around Albany, Burlington as well. And then notice here, as you work your way up into Canada, getting ready to cross over the lake, see some lightning strikes showing up. And it's with some of those thunderstorms heading east that we do have at least the risk for some severe weather here for isolated in nature. But again, damaging wind gusts, that's going to be a threat here for us all the way from the lake towards the coast as we head on through our day. Now, not just that, but we also have some strong winds to contend with. A number of areas where we do have wind alerts. Wind advisories, the lighter shade of purple, Binghamton, you're in there, all the way down towards New York City, Buffalo as well, and then heading into a good chunk of Massachusetts, where you have high wind warnings that are in place. So we're going to be talking even outside of some of those thunderstorms, some pretty strong winds. And that becomes a problem because this time of the year, those trees, they still have the leaves on them. And that no doubt could lead to trees coming down, power lines having issues and power outages. So just be prepared for that here across sections of the Northeast as we head through this afternoon and into tonight. Take a look at the future radar. The activity now, that will continue to spread off towards the east. Eventually, we'll see more thunderstorm activity breaking out, and that will head eastbound as well. Throughout the afternoon and early part of the evening, we should see the bulk of this activity spreading offshore later tonight. But again, there's still expected to be some gusty winds here across the sections of the Northeast, particularly into New England. So forecast in Boston, looking for the breezy weather here to continue and get a little stronger. 35 to 40 mile per hour wind gusts will be possible here for us. Chance for the rain comes in a little bit later today, 4 or 5 o'clock or so. That's when you'll see that chance. Drier, but still windy heading on into tonight. Well, coming up, the Gulf Coast set for a dangerous encounter with Hurricane Delta. After the break now, in-depth analysis from our hurricane expert, that's Dr. Greg Postel, on where the storm is headed as well as the impacts that Delta will bring. Team coverage here for you all day as well.
You're watching America's most trusted TV news network,
We've got a severe weather threat. Winds have been gusting the full force of this thing.
the Weather Channel. Get your daily dose of everything weather on Quibi. From the viral
Now to the weather video that we cannot stop watching.
to the vital
Get ready because we are in for another wet week.
and all the wonderful weather in between.
Boy, do we have a lot to talk about.
Weather Today from the Weather Channel. New episodes every day, only on Quibi.
Past the hour, and welcome back. I'm meteorologist Alex Wallace as we continue tracking Hurricane Delta. Well, the time to prepare is now. Just 2 days away from a possible U.S. landfall as Hurricane Delta spins into the Gulf of Mexico. This would be our 10th U.S. landfall of the season. Well, here's what we know about Delta right now. Delta made its first landfall this morning along the northeastern coast of the Yucatan Peninsula near Puerto Morelos. Hurricane watches now up from Houston to New Orleans, and all schools in Calcasieu Parish are closed. And we continue to watch this thing impacting the Yucatan Peninsula here at this time, bringing in again some gusty winds, strong winds, very heavy downpours as well, moving right along that general area. As a Category 2 hurricane, 975 millibar pressure with movement to the northwest at 17 miles per hour. So it continues to move at a fairly decent pace, and that's certainly a better scenario as opposed to sitting here and just dumping the rain and bringing all those big impacts with the winds. Eventually, we'll see this thing emerge out into the Gulf of Mexico, but for now, we still have hurricane warnings in place here for northeastern sections of the Yucatan, and on either side of that, in the red zones, we do have tropical storm warnings. No longer the case in western Cuba. They've dropped those alerts, so that is certainly some good news as this thing continues to pull farther and farther away. But boy, you can certainly see still some pretty intense thunderstorms here with this system, even as it's moving over land. Now, certainly it did weaken a bit, as was anticipated, moving over land and interacting with that. But as it emerges, we'll have to watch. In fact, seeing a bit of a flare-up of some storms there just offshore. As it emerges, we do think it will strengthen a bit more. Storm surge potential, we've got that. North coast 6 to 9 foot storm surge will be possible, but we'll watch the wind field move away. And you can see the yellow areas, tropical storm force winds, hurricane force winds in that red, right in that center area, right around 30 or so miles away from the center of the circulation. But again, this thing will be making its way closer to the northern Gulf Coast. We do have hurricane watches in the orange, yellow areas, tropical storm watches, and one of the threats we'll be facing is the storm surge here. And you see storm surge watches all along essentially the entire southern coast of Louisiana, and then extending even into southern parts of Alabama as well. So a number of impacts, including again that rise when it comes to that water. Let's bring in Dr. Postel to focus in on some of these impacts. And again, a lot of them that we'll be following here, Dr. Postel, over the coming days.
Yes, we're going to see a landfall on Friday from Hurricane Delta. It's almost a certainty, as close as you can get. And it will the center likely cross the coast of Louisiana as a strong hurricane. No doubt about that. We can hope that maybe on final approach, it's weakening at least a little bit. That might help, but still, we're going to see very significant wind damage potentially, and also a lot of coastal flooding, as Alex was mentioning, along, especially and to the right of the path by a great distance. This is going to be a growing in size system as it moves through the Gulf of Mexico. It's supposed to get bigger, hopefully weakening in the last 12 hours or so, but that's just a hope for now, and I'll explain that in a second. But we are going to see it move pretty much north, and that is meaning that the center is likely to make landfall once again in Louisiana, unfortunately, and then accelerate northeastward from there very quickly, extending the damage potential wind-wise well inland, over 100 miles, I'm sure, inland. We could see some of those damaging winds. So that's likely where it's going to go, and this is kind of likely what it might look like according to the GFS model. And you can see that the center is still here, let's say tomorrow evening, beginning its northward and then northeastward acceleration. Starting to see some impacts tomorrow evening, maybe some showers on the edge, maybe some gusty winds tomorrow night. And then Friday, the conditions get very bad, especially during the afternoon. Let's say the center makes it on board here. Expect wind gusts near 100 or over 100 miles per hour right in the eye wall that comes onshore. And then, of course, a very strong onshore wind for many locations that are facing the coast. We could see significant storm surge flooding very far east from the center. Here's what I'm hoping for. Looking at the oceanic heat content, the fuel from the ocean side of things for these tropical cyclones, as we move into the northern Gulf of Mexico, we lose a lot of that. The water temperature's cool, not as much fuel, Alex, and with the atmospheric conditions around it, there's good reason to suggest that in the final hours up to landfall, this thing will be weakening, but that's only a hope, a good hope at this point. Back to you.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, well, thanks so much, Dr. Postel. Louisiana set for a dangerous encounter with Hurricane Delta. That's where we find meteorologist Reynolds Wolf in New Orleans. Reynolds?
I'll tell you right now, looks are really deceiving. We've got partly cloudy skies the time being. The sun is coming down. Seems like you wouldn't have a care in the world, but what we have over the horizon, we've got Delta, and it's approaching. Full coverage coming up after this. We'll see you.
Watching America's most trusted TV news network.
We've got a severe weather threat.
Winds have been gusting the full force of this thing.
The Weather Channel. Get your daily dose of everything weather.
Wow! Boy, do we have a lot to talk about.
Weather Today from the Weather Channel. New episodes every day, only on Quibi.
Hello, America. Welcome back to continued coverage here on the Weather Channel. I'm meteorologist Reynolds Wolf, and today it is all about Hurricane Delta. Can't believe we're already into the Greek alphabet, but yet here we are, and that's the kind of year it's been. That's kind of tropical season it has been. And if you were just taking a gander out the window here in New Orleans, you might think that things could not be better. And I'll tell you, the way it looks right now, at least from this setting, it is quite pristine. You've got the historic skyline, you've got a patchwork of white and blue. Things look great. However, things expected to go very badly, possibly, over the next several hours and days. Big metamorphosis that we can expect. The rain starts moving in tomorrow. The heavier shower activity, heavier rain, possible surge into Friday, and yes, even into Saturday. Then the story carries into parts of the interior, back into possibly central Louisiana, into Mississippi, Alabama. We've got a long way to go with the system. In fact, all the way through the weekend, we're still going to be talking about Delta and what it could mean for millions of people. I'll tell you what this tropical season has meant for a lot of people. It's been frustrating beyond belief, especially for people over in Grand Isle. I want to show you first, though, some of the storm surge flooding that we had in New Orleans. This is compliments of Sally, give you an idea of what we've had so far this season. Now, what's interesting about the video that you see with Sally, with some of this flooding, you could say that this is any one of the systems we've dealt with this year, and it looks part and parcel with what we've dealt with in the past. A bit of deja vu, to say the very least. However, going to present time in Grand Isle, one thing that has certainly been a constant has been the frustration, but people are doing the best they possibly can. We actually heard earlier from Colin Arnold in New Orleans. He's with the EMA, and here's what he had to say about the people of New Orleans.
This has come around over and over again, and we've been ready every time. And I'm really proud of our residents, because when we ask them to do this, they listen. And I don't expect anything different this time as well. And we're looking at something that is very unpredictable and quite uncertain right now, but certainly something that is we have to watch all the way in.
I got to tell you, the people here in New Orleans truly are amazing. I mean, you've got to be resilient, you've got to be strong when you live in a situation like they happen to be. And Alex, when you think about it, they're on a razor's edge of land. You think about to the north, you've got Lake Pontchartrain. To the south, you've got the mighty Mississippi. So they're locked in a vice, so to speak. and much of the city, as you know very well, is below sea level. So it's a constant battle that you fight here between land and water and trying to hold back the potential of floodwaters rising on up. Let's send it back to you, Alex.
Yeah, thanks so much, Reynolds. Yeah, yet another system that certainly does have that potential to impact, and it has been a crazy, crazy year. Thanks so much, Reynolds. And here we go, looking at the projected path here as we head on through time. Again, this thing is expected to emerge off of the Yucatan Peninsula into the Gulf of Mexico. And as we head on through the rest of this week, begin to turn more off towards the north and then eventually towards the north and the east. Looks like sometime Friday afternoon into the early evening, making that landfall here for you. Still looking at a powerful system coming through, even though we do think that there is the chance this thing may try to weaken a bit. I'll put that in quotes. Still a system that's going to be formidable and one to absolutely pay attention and prepare for. Storm surge watches, they are in place. Parts of Texas, across basically all of Louisiana, and into southern sections of Mississippi as well as Alabama. That water rise going to take place here for us. And notice here, it looks like here again, it's going to be generally on off towards the east where the highest water rise will be, 7 to 11 feet. That is a possibility here. Now, when we look at this, the reminder here is it's not everywhere in that area that we'll be looking at that water rise, but somewhere in that zone, if things line up perfectly, could see 7 to 11 feet when it comes to the storm surge. Rainfall going to add up, and that could lead to some flash flooding. This is tomorrow's outlook from basically the Florida Panhandle into eastern Texas, and then extends northbound as the system moves in that direction Friday into Saturday for that possibility for some flash flooding as well. So a number of impacts, and water, no doubt, will be one of them.
Fierce wind gusts slamming Playa del Carmen this morning. Hurricane Delta making landfall along the northeastern coast of the Yucatan Peninsula around 5:30 Central Time this morning. These strong winds are just a preview of what we could see along the Gulf Coast on Friday. Let's have a look at sort of an estimate recent in the last few hours of what the wind field looks like with Delta. I believe the center is now closer to here, so it's about ready to come off the coast, and everything could be shifted over to the northeast a little bit. But the idea is that the max winds are probably somewhere between 80 and 100 miles per hour, given that it's been over land for a while. And we will see the hurricane hunters get out there later on this afternoon and evening and find for us exactly what the structure is on the interior, and that's going to be extremely helpful because we'll know what it looks like as it emerges over the Gulf of Mexico, likely in a few hours' time. But the idea is that you can, estimate where the center is, but notice that the winds extend outward, 20, 30, 40 miles from the center. Those strong winds well over 50 miles per hour and extend outward even beyond that. Hundreds of miles, we'll see some pretty strong winds as well. Check this out. I mean, this is the satellite loop here that I've got for us. I'm going to put a little coloring on that to show you that some of the tops here are as cold as minus 90 Celsius. Right in there. Some of those overshooting tops right there. 90 Celsius, that's how cold, that's how high they are. Probably somewhere now around 65,000 feet in altitude. So that is remarkable. We still have a very potent hurricane about ready to emerge over the water and likely to strengthen going forward. Be prepared for a landfalling hurricane in Louisiana with impacts extending well beyond that, with significant surge and very strong winds, especially right near the center. We'll be right back.
For kitchens broken in by new chefs.
Well, this is real.
When your cameras roll.
This is something nobody can imagine.
Our experts react.
What do you do?
Oh my gosh. Jaw-dropping.
Nope, 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 all the way back home.
It doesn't get better than this.
Don't miss all new episodes of Weather Gone Viral, Sunday nights at 9, here on the Weather Channel. Get your daily dose of everything weather.
Wow! Boy, do we have a lot to talk about.
Weather Today from the Weather Channel. New episodes every day, only on Quibi.
Welcome back to Weather Center Live. We will be watching Hurricane Delta over the next couple of days, which is now almost certain to make landfall along the northern Gulf Coast during the day on Friday as a very significant hurricane, likely bringing damaging winds and significant storm surge, life-threatening storm surge to many locations in and along the coast of Louisiana and even areas farther to the east that aren't even in the cone right now. That's the factor associated with landfalling tropical cyclones that we've tried to hammer home over, of course, all the years we've been covering them. But remember, the impacts extend outside of the cone, and we will likely see the impacts of Delta extend well inland in terms of wind speed and the potential for damaging winds, given it will be moving fairly quickly. So long and to the right of where the center goes, expect pretty significant winds well throughout Louisiana and Mississippi, even into early Saturday morning. So we will likely see the approach and movement of Delta like this during the night, tonight through tomorrow and tomorrow evening. I think by tomorrow evening, we will start to see some impacts along the northern Gulf Coast, maybe some showers on the distant periphery and some gusty winds from time to time. But let's say by Friday afternoon, early Friday afternoon, perhaps we will see the landfall very likely in Louisiana. And that will likely bring wind gusts over 100 miles per hour in the eye wall, Alex, and very significant storm surge along and to the right of the center, extending well to the east, perhaps as far east as Florida. Back to you.
Well, as wildfires sweep across the western U.S., well, it's creating a ripple effect across the nation. A sobering realization that this could become a new and scary normal. Dave Malkoff is in Santa Rosa, California, examining how the changing climate is helping to spark new danger.
This is an unprecedented fire season here in California. More than 4 million acres burned already, not to mention the homes and the businesses and the lives lost all throughout the West. So what is driving all of this?
It's really nasty, Brent.
They're called very large air tankers. These flights over flaming hillsides are now a common sight.
And you're cleared to drop.
Because there's no denying it, these fires are becoming larger, more destructive, and more frequent than ever before.
Things will burn hotter. The fires will be more aggressive.
The Glass Fire in Napa Valley is now nearly 70,000 acres. In the past, a fire a third that size may have happened once a year.
This year, we're looking at multiple 300,000, 800,000, 200,000 acre fires. These are huge swaths of California that have burned this year.
But this is one of those recurring nightmares. For example, 56 years ago, the Hanley Fire burned through wine country. Then in 2017, a repeat from the Tubbs Fire. Same area, different climate.
That fire in 1964 took 3.5 days. What the same fire in 2017 took 3.5 hours. What's going on in California is really the result of all of the factors climatically and as humans coming down to ground zero in a really, really dangerous way. Fire department!
It's dangerous because so many more people are moving into the woods. According to FEMA, there are 41% more homes in the fire zone now than there were in the 90s. Areas that could have naturally burned in the past have to be quickly put out by these firefighters. And right now, California's windy season is just getting started. Diablo and Santa Ana winds could easily fan this destruction right into next year.
It's not just land use planning. It's not just more staffing. It's not just more defensible space and more vegetation management. It's more of all of those things.
Me too.
There's simply more heat available these days. In the last 5 years, there's been an increase in temperature in the overnight hours. That allows the trees and the leaves to get super crispy and ready to burn when the blazing sun comes out in the morning. In Santa Rosa, California, Dave Malkoff, the Weather Channel.
And we still are watching the fire danger here in the middle of the country now. We're talking parts of the northern Rockies dealing with that. Red flag warnings, including Great Falls, with fire weather watches extending down into parts of Wyoming. Dry conditions with some gusty winds could fuel any fires. Of course, the majority of the fires here in the western part of the nation, 68 active large fires here for us. They burned more than 4 million acres. But here's some good news, something that we just not have seen a whole lot of. Is some wet weather coming in as we head into the weekend. Next storm system now brings some decent rain to the Pacific Northwest, but also some showers into Northern California and eventually some precip into the interior parts of the West. Now we're not looking for a ton of rain, But again, we just haven't seen a whole lot in this area. We'll take what we can get here in Northern California. Looks like up to an inch here for us. Be nice to get a little bit more farther south, but not this time around. The higher totals, western parts of Washington State. There could be some zones there around the Olympic Peninsula that could get anywhere from 5 to 8 inches of rain. Well, Delta, that is making a landfall here this morning there in Mexico. We saw that, and that means it's headed to the Gulf Coast next, as well as the time to prepare is quickly running out. Just ahead of what you can do now that could save your life later.
This roll, our experts react.
Jaw-dropping.
Weather gone viral, Sunday nights at 9, here on the Weather Channel.
Good afternoon from Morgan City, Louisiana. I'm meteorologist Mike Seidel, continuing coverage of Hurricane Delta, expected to strengthen again to a major hurricane. Coming up, we'll show you what they're already doing in this city that's only 7 feet above sea level. Dr. Postel, you've got the latest back there in Atlanta.
Yeah, with just 2 days to go until a likely landfall, there are still plenty of factors at play that could drastically change Delta's forecast. Breaking it all down coming up.
Plus, the historic wildfire season continues to rage out west, but rain relief may be on the way for some of the hardest hit cities. We're timing out when the first drops will fall. Well, hi there and welcome to Weather Center Live. I'm meteorologist Alex Wallace, along with hurricane specialist Dr. Greg Postel. The U.S. Gulf Coast, well, on alert as we've got our dangerous Hurricane Delta. That is expected to spin into the Gulf of Mexico, this after making landfall in the Yucatan Peninsula earlier this morning. Delta now bringing life-threatening storm surge and strong winds to the northeastern portions of the Yucatan Peninsula, and that includes popular tourist destinations like Cancun and also Campeche. The hurricane hunters, they were out gathering the very latest data on Hurricane Delta as it moves out over the Yucatan Peninsula and towards the Gulf Coast. So let's get you the very latest here when it comes to the National Hurricane Center advisory, the 10 o'clock advisory Central Time, 105-mile-per-hour hurricane, Category 2, so still on the sort of higher end of the Category 2 scale, northwest movement at 17 miles per hour. So it is still moving pretty quickly, and that is good news as we will see the impacts starting to lessen as we head on through the day here across the Yucatan, as opposed to just sitting here, stalling out and bringing in quite a bit of rain and, of course, the strong winds. But getting a bit closer, this thing is maintained in terms of the intense thunderstorms around the center of the circulation, and now beginning to emerge a little bit of a pulse here just offshore. We'll see what goes on with that, if it can maintain itself, because, again, we are anticipating as it moves back over to the waters for it to ramp back up in terms of strengthening. Right now, we do still have hurricane warnings that are in place here for northeastern portions of the Yucatan Peninsula. No longer dealing with any alerts here in western parts of Cuba. Good news, they were allowed to drop those tropical storm warnings there as the system has moved by. But watch out for storm surge. Still could be in the order of 6 to 9 feet. Now, not everywhere in that zone looking for 6 to 9 feet, but the possibility for somewhere in that area to see that be realized. Looking at the winds and the wind field associated with Delta, we will see those stronger winds push away as we head on through the rest of the day and into tonight. By about 2 o'clock or so Central Time, tropical storm force winds in the yellow, the red areas, that's where we have the hurricane force winds again pulling away and moving across the central portions of the Gulf of Mexico, and then eventually making its way towards the Gulf Coast. That's why there are hurricane watches that are up. Hurricane conditions possible in that orange zone, parts of Texas, Louisiana dealing with that, and then tropical storm watches that are in place, including there for you in New Orleans. And this is where we also have storm surge watches here, pretty much the entire southern coast of Louisiana dealing with that, a little bit of Texas, and then also extending into southern portions of Mississippi as well as Alabama. We'll be watching these areas with some of that water that may try to rise in the order of in some of the higher cases here for us, at least right now, 7 to maybe 11 feet. Can't rule that out. So a lot of different impacts we'll be feeling. Let's bring in Dr. Postel to talk about what's going on with Delta and this system as it gets closer and closer, conditions moving downhill. Of course, everyone wants to know the million-dollar question, exactly where it's going to be headed.
Yes, we think the landfall will be in Louisiana, likely on Friday during the day. This is the cone from the Hurricane Center showing you a very powerful hurricane closing in on the northern Gulf Coast, and in particular, Louisiana. And of course, areas nearby will be significantly impacted as well. And then accelerating inland as it gets caught up in the jet stream, bringing with it significant impacts, including damaging winds well inland. That is also something to consider. Let's talk about the movement and the track and the odds of it making a landfall, let's say, in Louisiana. I think they're very high. There's really no way around it. When you have a dip in the jet stream like that, the odds of this thing moving westward unexpectedly are very small. And when you look at the sort of cone here, well, really not the cone, but the track models, each one of these yellow lines is a different model forecast of the center of Delta, and also the official Hurricane Center's forecast, you can see that the clustering is in western or central Louisiana for this thing to make landfall as it accelerates northward in response to the very strong winds aloft moving in. Now, again, this is not a forecast of the sort of impacts, because when you look at those, that is showing you that they will be spread far and wide like they always are with landfalling hurricanes. Thursday evening, tomorrow evening, Hurricane Delta will likely be here, potentially as a major hurricane. And beginning, I think we will see some of the impacts along the northern Gulf Coast with some scattered showers and some gusty winds from time to time. But let's say the landfall at some point during the day on Friday is in southern Louisiana, like this GFS model suggests, which is very consistent with the other model forecasts. We will likely see wind gusts over 100 miles per hour in the eye wall, especially on the eastern side of the circulation. And notice that these winds will be onshore along and to the east of where the center makes landfall, bringing the potential for very significant storm surge all the way through Louisiana into areas eastward of Mississippi, Alabama, and maybe even the Florida Panhandle. What about the intensity? Well, there's some reason to suggest that perhaps Delta will be on a weakening trend on final approach, in part because the oceanic heat content, the amount of fuel from the ocean that is available, will be significantly less, or is significantly less, in the northern Gulf of Mexico. That won't guarantee it, but I'm telling you, there is a lot less fuel there than there has been, certainly over the Caribbean, and even so over parts of the central Gulf Coast. So, Alex, when you look at the hurricane intensity forecasts, there is a consensus that indeed the hurricane on final approach will be weakening, and that is what we can hope for. Back to you.
Absolutely. Well, much of the state of Louisiana is in the cone of concern of Hurricane Delta. Live look at New Orleans for you right now, and conditions there in the Big Easy likely to start deteriorating as we head to the end of the week. Now, a shift in the track could push more of the worst of the weather into New Orleans. That cannot be ruled out. Regardless, Louisiana Governor John Bel Edwards says people need to be prepared.
Is it going to be a 3? Is it going to be a 2? I would ask people not to focus so much on that and just to prepare for a major hurricane. And all of the damaging winds, the damaging surge, and the damaging rain, whether it's from flash flooding or river flooding that hurricanes can bring.
Well, meteorologist Mike Seidel is live in Morgan City, Louisiana. And Mike, I'm sure folks are just ready to be done with this hurricane season, but are they taking this storm seriously as they should be?
Oh, they are. In fact, they lucked out with Laura. It was just far enough west that here in Morgan City, they had a 3-foot surge. This is the Atchafalaya River heading down towards the Mississippi. The basin is huge, covers about a third of the entire state of Louisiana, about 500,000 acres. They're doing some dredging out here. This has nothing to do with tropical weather. This is just the normal dredging they do to keep the river channel nice and deep. But we'll come back this way, and we are on the east side of the river. New Orleans, by the way, New Orleans is about 65 miles off to our north and east. But look at the seawall. This is 22 feet high. Now, they built this higher in '85, completed it in 1985, after they had some horrible flooding in '73. It was only 12 feet. I'll walk over here and get a sense of how tall this wall is. In fact, they just closed this about 25 minutes ago. So they're starting to close these gates along the seawall. This protects them up to 22 feet. The elevation of Morgan City is only 7 feet. So this is a good thing to have, because if we get the projected storm surge this far up, right now the storm surge for the part of the Gulf Coast, which is south of us, from Port Fourchon to Pecan Island, including Vermilion Bay and Atchafalaya Bay, the worst case scenario is 7 to 11 feet. So if we get 7, 8 feet of water, it's going to come right up here, but this is going to keep the river out of Morgan City. Go up above, we've got some good drone video, get a sense of what this wall looks like and how it protects this city on the Atchafalaya River. Also, on the east and north side of Morgan City, we've got 2 big lakes. This whole town is surrounded by water. So they're very concerned As I mentioned, Laura, they had the seawall closed, a 3-foot surge, and they had it closed last year with Barry. But this could be worse than Laura because of its track farther to the east and also stronger winds. They did have some power outages here. In fact, people from Lake Charles actually came over here and spent more than a few nights when they lost their power, and even in some spots lost their power and water. So, Alex, a lot of folks worried about this one because of the track and pushing the water right up the Atchafalaya River from the bay into Morgan City. But the thing that you want to note, though, is that Delta is forecast to move at a pretty good clip. And unlike Sally, which made landfall at about 2 or 3 miles an hour, the fact that it's going to be moving much faster, that does hold hope that we don't get those huge rainfall totals that we had from Sally.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike, no doubt. We can only hope we continue to see this thing stay on the fast track, and certainly, again, the hope that it will be weakening as it approaches as well. All right, here's that track, in fact, as we head on through time. This is as we get to about Friday morning. Still 120-mile-per-hour hurricane at this point, but you do notice here by Friday afternoon into the evening making that landfall and then moving towards the north and the east. But again, spreading its impacts, we'll start to see the water begin to rise. Storm surge watches, they're already up. Parts of Texas, most of Louisiana, in fact, all of the Louisiana coast into parts of southern Mississippi as well as Alabama, dealing with that. Look at some of the forecasted water rises here for us. Heading back towards the west. Again, this could be mostly on the west side of where the system makes that landfall. Maybe 1 to 3 foot storm surge here as we get towards places like Galveston, but really realizing the highest water rise east of where the center of the circulation is as we get more of that onshore push of water. Could be seeing 7 to 11 feet. Now, not everywhere in that area will see that, but somewhere in that zone that can happen if everything works together and comes together perfectly in that zone. That could certainly happen. Rainfall is going to add up. This is tomorrow into Friday morning. Flash flood potential here anywhere you see the green, including the Florida Panhandle, and then we see that moving northbound as we get into Friday and Saturday as the system moves in that general direction. And don't forget about the potential for isolated tornadoes. That is a risk here for us as we get into Friday from southwestern portions of Alabama into southeastern sections of the state of Louisiana. Rainfall amounts looks like adding up pretty well here across Louisiana, Arkansas, into Mississippi. A widespread 3 to 5 inches. And Dr. Postel, we could see some higher amounts approaching double digits.
Yeah, I think we will, Alex. Let's look at Mobile, Alabama, currently on the eastern edge of the area, likely to experience tropical storm force winds when Delta approaches the Louisiana coast on Friday. This city is still recovering from the impact of Hurricane Sally, which came ashore 3 weeks ago between Mobile and Pensacola. Let's have a look at Hurricane Delta right now. Very impressive on the satellite pictures with extremely cold cloud tops, meaning the thunderstorms have vigorous updrafts inside of them, and in some cases are reaching altitudes up to 65,000 feet. So there's a lot of convection with this system, and it's concentrated near the center. So there's every reason to suspect that while it did lose intensity late yesterday and moving over land overnight and into this morning, that it will regain at least some of what it lost once it gets back out of the Gulf of Mexico. So that is something to concern ourselves with. But imagine this, let's say tomorrow late in the afternoon, right? With the center of Delta very close to, if not on shore of Louisiana. We will likely see wind gusts over 100 miles per hour in an eye wall, assuming the forecast verifies, and a strong onshore wind in many locations that extend well east of where the center goes, bringing that storm surge and the coastal flooding potential with it. We will also likely see the damaging wind threat continue inland as well. Perhaps more so than we've seen with other recent hurricanes, because this one will be moving fairly quickly. And along and to the right of where the path of the center goes, watch out for some very strong winds that may extend all the way through Mississippi, the kind of wind that can do damage to trees and some infrastructure as well. Last one, when is the earliest expected arrival of tropical storm force winds along the coast? That would be on Saturday, 8 a.m. That seems a little bit late to me. Back to you.
Thanks so much, Dr. Postel. Now, as the storm approaches, evacuation alerts, they're going to go out. And when that happens, it's vital to know what evacuation zone that you're in or visiting. Meteorologist Paul Goodlow has some tips.
Hurricane evacuation saves countless lives each year. So it's important to know if you live in an evacuation zone and how to escape the area. Evacuations vary by state and locality. Some cities and counties provide maps so residents know their zone, but some areas don't make that determination in advance. Check with your town or Office of Emergency Management if you have any questions, because evacuation zones can change from year to year. Plan your evacuation route in advance. If you're going on a trip, find out about evacuation zones from your hotel. Listen for updates from local officials. And if you live in an evacuation zone, be ready to go immediately if orders come to get out of the area.
Some good advice. Well, here's a look at the forecast rainfall totals here as we head on through the next 5 days. And right now, the higher totals seem to be centered in here from far eastern Texas, across a good chunk of Louisiana, up into Arkansas and Mississippi. I mean, those yellow areas, 3, 4, 5 inches of rain, and then even some pockets of orange showing up just east of Lake Charles, where we'll be in that 5, 6 to 7 inch category. There's your forecast in Lake Charles, watching conditions going downhill. Thursday night into Friday, the winds will start to pick up out there for you as well. And continuing into at least our Saturday morning, we should start to see things improving as the system moves farther to the north throughout the day on Saturday. New Orleans, right now you're in that kind of 1 to 2 inch category. But again, any shift in this track, and that could bring some of the higher totals into your neck of the woods. So certainly monitor that. But for now, looks like about in that 1 to 2 inch range. Well, we have plenty more to come here ahead here on Weather Center Live as we track Hurricane Delta. Strong wind whipping through the northeast today, and that could cause some serious issues for drivers just ahead, when you should hold on to your hats and get a grip on that rain gear.
A woman who was